Okay, hi, Zoom folks and YouTube and whoever's watching this. This is October the 15th. This is the bi-weekly Shadow Tech Alchemy Zoom call. And you can always get into these Zoom calls. They're free and public through going to shadowtechalchemy.com and clicking on the events page. And this talk today is, well, it's entitled The Practice of Alchemical Life Art. And this is where we're gonna wing it today, because this is something that's really in the works and has been in the works for many years and is still in the works, and it's really not ready for prime time yet, but
Actually, we pretty much talk about the same
yeah.
subjects, the same process every time we get together. And what we're trying to do is synthesize it into a very simplified form
Yes.
that others can adapt in their own ways and use
Yes.
in a helpful manner. So that's
That's what we're
basically-
trying to do. We're trying to take what we have already been doing for the last 10 years together and start to figure out what are the four corners of this. Is this, if you could call it, a practice, a system, a method, a philosophy? You know, what are the boundaries of this thing? And I've been, trying to quantify what that is for a long time, and it's always kind of the same, but then it's always kind of still rough. And I recently, in the last few days, I sort of said, okay, let's try to write down what this is again. And I took a bunch of notes, and then it's kind of like it's not ready until every time you write it down, every time you bring it up, you can kind of easily spit out, well, this is what it is. When you're really, it's still in development. And I'd say that, judging from my little practice runs that I've been doing over the years, it's still very much in development. But talking about it is very helpful. Forcing myself to write it down, talk to you about it, get on in the public with it, put it out there, it really processes it. Even if I don't get a whole lot of feedback from folks, it's still very helpful to have to challenge myself to put it into the world and make mistakes and
I think because it's process oriented and because it's what we call life art, and it's very organic and it's very individualized, that simplifying it's actually very easy. What it is that we're doing, it's easy, but it's
very
challenging.
yeah, I'd say it's simple but difficult.
Yes.
Right.
And anyone or any quote unquote system or map of this information, it's that what we're doing and what we're saying is not new.
No.
This has been done.
This is a spiritual worldview and practice that is, I could explain it as through the concept of the perennial philosophy. And I don't think I'm actually going to read this, but I put out an email preceding these talks every other week, and they kind of go over the way we're going to approach things. And the idea here was that it's the theory of a perennial philosophy, which basically is sort of the archetypal underlying spirit that all spiritual movements and all religions have in common. And it keeps re-emerging, first through mystics, through shaman, through alchemists, through these kinds of
religions.
But first, it comes through cultural outsiders. It comes through individuals.
Yeah.
And then it gets shared, and then it gets encoded into culture, and it shifts, and it oftentimes loses a lot of its potency is diluted. But at least it makes it in, and then you have a whole new cultural movement, a religious or spiritual movement that will emerge. And we're in a time in history in the West where we're in a transitional period where the spirituality that we've had for the last 2,000 years is it's still present, and you could say Christianity is still very powerful, and monotheism is still very powerful in the world. But in the West, in the postmodern West, a large chunk of the society cannot really live in an embodied state that is of the same nature of people who are coming from this mythic mindset. We can't do that anymore. We can do some of what that entails, but not fully embody that. And so, but there's nothing that is compatible with rationality that is a spiritual or religious worldview that is compatible with rationality hasn't emerged yet. And so we're really in a transitional time. And so we're in a time where basically, if people are compelled to, they are driven towards what you would call a spiritual way of being in the world. And if you can't plug back in to an existing spiritual operating system and use that completely, you're kind of in a place where you have to construct your own. And when all kinds of people start constructing their own, what's going to happen over a long period of time, or we don't know how long, but over a period of time, is that everybody's personal vision, personal version is going to kind of interface with everybody else's, and some kind of new consensus will form. And in the same way that artists of a particular genre start to, on their own, create art or music, let's say, that is similar in certain ways, that has certain similarities, and they may be somewhat influenced by each other, but also quite isolated in a way. And a lot of times artists try to isolate themselves to make their art original. But no matter what, a movement, a genre will show itself. And then people will later go back and go, well, who were the artists that kind of made up the boundaries of this new genre? And then people will draw kind of a map around it, and they'll go, oh, okay, it was these guys. And that's the way it is also with spirituality and spiritual movements. So we're all just individual spiritual artists just doing our own thing, and over time it will contribute to the creation of some new paradigm.
Yeah, now some people may use a previous operating system like Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism or Islam or whatever it is.
Yes.
They may use that as their personal background operating system, but this is like an update. This is like an update of an operating system that's been in human consciousness for thousands of years.
Yeah, in the same way that if you study the origins of Christianity, you will find that Christianity is really an update of the Roman and Greek and Egyptian and Mesopotamian spiritual operating systems that preceded it. It's really an update. It's its own entity, and it's quite different in many ways, and it moves human consciousness in new directions. But it is also an appendage of the pre-existing spirit that has been manifesting over and over again, which is the perennial philosophy itself.
Yeah, because these operating systems, religions, and spiritual movements and ways of life, there's an archetypal energy in them.
Yes.
That works.
We could call that its spirit. There is a
It's
spirit, a life, a living process.
it's a living jewel. And so all that we are doing is that there's some of us that are more individualistic, and there might be more of these people now who need their own operating system.
Right, that's what I was saying, yes.
Though I do use, like, I've been praying lately, you
Right,
know, so
right.
I use a little bit of all of it.
Of whatever. It's just like being an artist. This is the practice of alchemical life art is and we'll get into this, is an artistic process.
Right.
And so an artist is taking this influence and taking this influence and this influence, and they are, even though they may be predominantly using this influence, they're using other influences and they're creating something unique. And it's the same thing going on here with this kind of personal spirituality. I should also say that if you're looking for a reference for what we're talking about in the existing Western culture, it's the easiest way to the person or the thing to point to is Carl Jung and the Jungian system. And even though we're going to be, kind of going off from that, if you kind of wanted some kind of example of is there somebody else doing this, I would say just look into Jung and the Jungian system, because a lot of what we're doing is coming out of that. And I would say that is really just another manifestation. What Jung was doing is another manifestation of this same tradition. And so this is an esoteric spiritual tradition that has been kind of underground underneath the mainstream Christianity and mainstream religion of the Western world. And it's really not an Eastern Taoist or Buddhist or Tibetan or anything like that, although because this is all coming from the perennial philosophy, there's similarities across the board, but this is more of an esoteric Western kind of a spirituality, and that's why we might call it alchemy. And it's a hermetic kind of a practice. So I wrote these things down, these points here, and I already disagree with some of them already. Just so please bear with us, and this will definitely not be the be all end all presentation, and but some stuff will come out of it. So everything that this is an alchemical practice, meaning it is a practice of purification and transmutation. And it is the substance to be purified and transmuted is the human psyche, the human soul, the individual, actually the physical body, but to more of a degree, the internal state of the individual, the mind. And
more than the mind, you would have to define that, because...
Well, when I say the mind,
Yeah.
I mean the psyche.
Right.
The whole thing. So I mean feelings are in the mind, all your unconscious drives are in the mind. The mind is everything of the internal subjective state of the human being. So mind and psyche to me are interchangeable. Mind is not just the thinking, chattering part. It's the whole thing. But so this is about the purification and transmutation of the mind. Now this happens naturally just through ongoing development as you grow up, so to speak. And as you grow up, your mind, your psyche, goes through all of these different changes and processes, just as the body is changing in coordination with it. But then once you become an adult, once you're say 25 years old or older, the basic psyche and the brain and the all the the hormonal system and all of that is stabilized, and there you are. And then within our culture, we don't really have a psycho-spiritual system of development that really says, okay, now let's take what nature already created at age 18 to 25, and now let's start consciously applying ourselves to the further development of the psyche in a conscious way. And you could say that religious practice is a way of stabilizing oneself, and stabilizing oneself personally and within the collective society. And so it is a maintenance process.
Yeah, and it also gives you a moral structure to work in the world.
That's right.
It's been incredibly helpful.
You have to have that.
Yeah.
You have to have some kind of a system that basically gives you psycho-spiritual maintenance and gives you answers for your purpose and your place in the world and all of that. You have to have that. So, but we don't. In the East, they do have more of these esoteric traditions, these yogic systems, these alchemical systems that are about developing further past what you naturally do just genetically. But in the West, that has really been suppressed. And so this is a process, this is a practice of consciously focusing on one's inner state of being and noticing where basically it is a practice of saying, okay, here's what I started with. And everybody comes up in the world with natural talents and natural creative drives and natural personality traits that are just there. And they also come up with all of their shadow stuff, all their pathological stuff, and inherited intergenerational trauma stuff, their neuroses, so to speak. And this is the process of basically looking at the whole lump of clay and saying, okay, that's a lump of clay, and now let me start to consciously reformulate this into something that's more perfect than how I came into the world. And so
maybe perfect isn't
more perfect.
I would say more closer to the essence of who it is that you are deep inside, the archetype of you, the soul essence jewel of who you are. Basically, it's a series, it's a process of uncovering that,
right,
of polishing that.
Yes.
And that's individuation.
Yes, and that's the Jungian term for this process, this alchemical process of self-development is called individuation in the Jungian system. And we could actually just put what you said right up front. So the idea here is that every individual has a potential creative purpose. And it's multifaceted, and it really cannot be fully fathomed with the conscious mind. And it is, the way Jung puts it, is kind of a Gnostic way of putting it, in that this inner purpose, this inner pattern, so to speak, is in the Gnostic system, the individual has a spark, a sliver of the Creator in themselves. It's sort of like a holographic image of the cosmos or of God. Is a little piece is inside of every individual. and the clarification and the bringing into the world of that code, that pattern, that unique creative pattern is your life's purpose. And there's all of these forces of nature that would collectivize the individual and push the individual into being an automaton. And the individual, that's why it's called individuation, their task is to say, okay, there's my collective duties in the world, but then there is my personal, what they call imago Dei, or image of God, which is in me, that I have to focus on, and I have to start to nurture and give energy to, and allow it to show me and lead me and guide me. So a little inner function of God within the individual.
And this can be dangerous too, because
Yes.
if you're not dealing with your shadow and the trauma and the epigenetic trauma and any kind of neuroses that have come with you, then you can take that archetype of you and this jewel, and that's a piece, that's part of God, that's
Yes.
part of the greater purpose, but you're still an ant.
Right.
You're not God.
No.
And this is where the story
you
of
are and you're not at the same time, but yes.
Yes. So this is the story of Prometheus or
Yeah.
Lucifer.
Right.
You see it in our society, in our culture.
This is grandiosity, yes.
Grandiosity, narcissism.
Right.
So it is challenging. It's simple but challenging, and
if we go back to Edward Edinger, Jungian, and his psychic life cycle, you can see that what is happening is that over the course of life, this danger that you're talking about of grandiosity, of arrogance, of hubris, this is the archetype of Lucifer and Prometheus. That basically what happens is the danger is not actually even a danger that comes from doing this work. It is a danger which is always present and the human is always struggling with, and it is, if that imago Dei, that seed of God within, is called, if we refer to that in the Jungian system as the self with the capital S, not the self with the small s, which is the conscious ego, but the self with the capital S, that's always emanating this creativity. It's always emanating this sometimes destructive, sometimes constructive creativity. It's always emanating this direction. And that when the ego mind gets a hold of some of this juice, right, of this God stuff within, and it starts to identify with this God stuff within, then if you get a direct channel, if you get a boost, well, if you can control it, if the ego can control it, then what happens is a massive creative flooding of energy, and one creates something incredible, Einstein's theory or whatever it is, and or whatever it is, something magnificent comes out of this touching of the imago Dei. But what and it will just make its way into the world as genius. Fantastic. But what can also happen is that it can go to your head, so to speak. And so then what happens is the ego starts to flood up with this energy, this godlike energy, and says, wow, look how great I am. And in the worst case scenario, you get a Christ complex. And you actually think, hey, wait a minute, I am God.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could
right?
be.
People do this.
Yes.
They come out. They have one of this identification
They
with
might
the self.
take ayahuasca or something like that.
And there's an identification of the
Yeah.
self, and then all of a sudden they get inflated. It's called inflation. And then some people emerge from these states and they say, wow, I realized I am the second coming of Christ. that
Yeah.
happens.
Or they become a cult leader, a
Right.
mini cult
Cult leader or whatever. Or they
They
say,
become a famous.
I'm the reincarnation of Edward Casey. I am the reincarnation of this ancient deity or whatever it is.
Yeah, but you know.
So that's the danger of touching this, the capital S self, of touching this seed of God within. And so it is and so this is why this is why these kinds of principles that we're talking about here really need to go out to everybody. Everybody needs to learn how to basically, what grandiosity is, and how to be able to not stifle your creativity, but also not let it go to your head, and to find that balance. That's for everybody, not just alchemists and people who are really dedicated to psychospiritual work. But so that's kind of at the core of everything, what you just mentioned about the process of, this is the Grail quest, right? This is the quest for the Holy Grail. And so the whole thing, this whole process of individuation, of alchemical self-work, of inner work, of psychospiritual development work, the whole thing starts with an intuition or a realization that how I am right now is not good enough. And however you want to phrase that. You can phrase it, like I have some examples right down here. It's an intuition that I need to advance myself. It's always focused inward, though. This is not an intuition that I need to advance my career. This is an intuition that I need to advance myself internally, develop myself, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could be triggered by, say, some dark night, or
Yes.
a breaking of a relationship.
That's right.
Being fired or losing your job.
That's right.
Or
This realization,
losing or facing death.
in
or
fact,
all these
this
different
probably
things.
is the most common way that we realize, okay, I have to evolve myself. I have to develop myself, heal myself, work on myself, is because we have a crash. And back to Edinger's life cycle, after you're all full of yourself and you're like Icarus trying to fly too close to the sun, you get burnt up by objective reality and you fall down into the sea and you're crashed and you have to rebuild yourself. And it is in those down cycles, in the bottom of the cycle there, where that's where you have the opportunity to reflect when your grandiosity has been blown up, and you have the opportunity to reflect and say, well, I wasn't as smart or as conscious or as evolved as I thought I was. Mm-hmm. So that's the perfect time to start the work, and that is really when, for many people, this intuition that I have to evolve myself, usually comes at the bottom of a crash like that. But it can also be something that is just latent in the latent and in the background, that you kind of, now that you're at this realization, now that you're more serious about doing this inner work, you look back and you go, you know what? That was always there. I always knew. So it was always there. And I would get these little sparks of epiphany that would say, you know, at some point, you're going to have to work through that. At some point, you're going to have to really mature in this way or that way. So you always kind of knew that you had this task ahead of you of doing this inner development work. And maybe it wasn't until you had some kind of a crash, you were an addict, you hit rock bottom, or you blew up your career, or you blew up a marriage or whatever, that you started to say, okay, I'm obviously, I obviously have issues, I obviously have problems, and so now's time to start the work. So everything starts with the idea that I have to change myself from the inside out. If there is not that impulse and that willingness and that drive to do this kind of work, then nothing follows from there. And you just go back into the matrix, so to speak, and you just go along your way and let your unconscious mind just guide you, and whatever happens, happens, and you go back into the collective world. Mm-hmm. So everything starts with that. The next thing that once you get to the point of, okay, I have to develop myself, and you may not know how, and you may be seeking, and you may be looking at Buddhism, you may be looking at Christianity, maybe this, that, and the other. I need some kind of a spiritual system. I need
And
something.
now there's just so much out there
Yeah.
at your fingertips.
Everything's at your fingertips, and you're just like, okay, but you're just a seeker. You're just called a seeker. That's what it is. You're a seeker. You're a novice, but the first thing, the first practice that has to be cultivated is the practice, or it is the practice of mindfulness in general. Mm-hmm. Mindfulness in general, and that is the continual bringing. So the mind. This is now the thinking mind, the ego mind. I'm going to talk about here. The ego mind is constantly analyzing, projecting, fantasizing, remembering, scheming. It's doing all of this active activity. And it can be focused. It's like a flashlight, and it just focuses on this, it focuses on this, and it goes like this. And it's just going like this all the time, right? It's going, oh, I'm going to open up this can of water right now. And then, boom, it's over to here. And then it's over to here. And then it's back to here. And then it's back to what my notes are. And this is it. Well, that if left alone, that's the Buddhists call it monkey mind, and that
the machine,
or the robot, right?
The
robot, Colin Wilson, the robot, and that's the robot, that's the monkey mind. It's doing what it's doing, but it can be used to, if it's turned inward, it can be used to analyze one's inner state of being. And so when something happens in the external world, there's an internal reflection, or there's an internal reaction to that, and one can study that. One says something that one knows is maybe difficult for another person to hear, and then one says this thing, and then one watches the reaction, and then one studies one's own reaction to that person's reaction, and you start to focus yourself. You go into some kind of a situation in life, and then you just engage in that situation while watching what happens inside of you.
You always have a separate part of the self that's
part of the ego, I would say.
That's the outside observer of all things that are going on in your reality.
Right.
So, and if you can just get that, where you're going to work and you're interacting and you're doing your daily tasks, at the same time you're looking at things, you're saying, okay, what does that person really mean? How do I feel?
Oh.
What does this experience or this interaction mean? There's always an outer observer. It's an observer of your reality that's outside of your day-by-day consciousness. And it's always there. And the more that you do mindfulness, the more that you can be in that outside observer state all the time. Because then, if you're doing shadow work, if you're starting to really notice your own reactions and projections and interactions, and you start to take responsibility for those, then you can start to have more control, a more advanced, more mature control, and make decisions not based on just the robot, but it becomes.
Let me get in there.
It becomes more conscious. I'm trying to simplify this.
Okay, so with the watcher part that you're talking about, the self-aware part, the mindfulness part, there is the thinking mind, right? And it is basically in fantasy, right? And it's thinking about, okay, I'm going to go to the store, and then I'm going to have to go from here to here, and it can kind of see the store, and you can kind of imagine this. And then, oh yeah, I got to go meet with so-and-so. And then you start thinking about, well, I wonder if they are going to take me seriously about this. And you start imagining, you start going down the train of, oh, maybe this or that. And you start imagining, you start analyzing your projection of how that person is, and you just, all this stuff is all this thought process. That's thinking. And then there is the watcher, and that is the part that's above the thinking that says, look at me thinking. That just says, oh, there I am, going through all these different scenarios, projecting all these fantasies onto other people. Here I am, like right now, I'm just doing it. I'm going, look at my hand, it's going like this. I'm listening to my voice, and there is an awareness above doing and thinking that is just there, sitting there, watching Colin, right? And that this state of awareness, this watcher state of awareness that can watch, that watches oneself think, watches oneself process,
And you watch
watches
yourself
oneself engage in the world,
and feel too. That's
watches
very important.
oneself feel. All of these things, this is this watcher, and the watcher itself could be seen like a camera lens. And the camera lens is there always looking at, it's filming this scene in the movie of life. And the camera lens, though, can be very granular and kind of just be there as a general kind of watcher that, yeah, I know, it's self-aware. I'm self-aware. I know that I'm thinking. I see myself thinking these things and feeling these things, but it's kind of blurry. And as you do this work and as you develop over long periods of time, the lens, the watcher lens, gets more and more clear, more and more, like Ram Dass says, you polish the mirror. You're polishing this lens of the highest perception that you have available.
Yeah, now this is no different than what a Zen Buddhist master
This is the same thing.
would say, cut wood, carry water, repeat, in a way, because what he's doing.
That's a different idea, though.
But same with the
mindfulness is a Zen principle, is a Buddhist and Eastern principle.
In like the Gurdjieff work, so they would have these camps where you would go and just do physical work, but that's not the point. The point is to develop
to
this
watch yourself engaged in work
and be in the moment of the work while you're processing, while you're observing what it is you're doing.
Now there's the more Eastern side of this, which basically says this is the Zen practice of just, it's no mind, it's turning off the thinking mind, and it's just engaging in the work, and the watcher is watching, and the mind is not going off into all these other things. That's the Eastern approach to mindfulness, more or less, until you get, I think, into these esoteric yogic systems.
Well, what's the
and then, but this system, and this is more like a yogic system, this is, you can do that, that's a great practice, but this is an active process of inner analysis.
Yeah.
Right? So you're using so the other one is the monkey mind turns off, and the watcher is just there watching me doing my gardening. Just right there. That's all that's going on. No judgment, no fantasy, no nothing else, just watching, doing the gardening with nothing else to do but watch. That's the Zen way. This way, this more Western or more yogic, I guess, way, is this more alchemical way, is the alchemist. They're engaged in a scientific process. This is a scientist. This is the magician archetype. This is somebody who is saying, okay, I'm watching the monkey mind, I'm watching the ego mind do all of its stuff, and I'm categorizing things, and I'm studying, and I'm asking questions. Why did I think that thing? Why do I keep thinking that thing? Studying your cycles and all of your internal states. So this is an active kind of process of of analysis. You're your own psychoanalyst, right?
Right. Yeah. But I think that the two ways
You do both.
You do both, because what you're going to start to notice when you're just doing your tasks and you're watching is that in between the analyzing your monkey mind, analyzing the thoughts, there will be more space of being in the moment, in the space of the moment. And this
That's
is
right.
more of what like Eckhart Tolle
Yes.
is talking
That's
about.
right. That's right.
You know,
This
the power of being in the moment,
Yeah.
in the now.
power
right?
now. Yeah, that's so these are, and these are both these types of mindfulness, the active kind and the passive watcher kind. These are both high level practices, and some people will be the more I'm the kind of person, and many people will be more. It's harder to do. It's easier for me to do the active analysis than it is to do the other stuff, which is why I have to do more of the other stuff too. So whatever it is that you're not as good at and that you want to, and that gives you pushback, is what you have to go into. So if the first stage is I have to change myself, I have to change the way I am internally, I have to purify myself, I have to develop myself. That's number one. Then the next one is, well, let me find out what myself is. Let me start watching myself in all these situations and start categorizing and understanding my cycles, my thoughts, my feelings, all my impulses and drives and addictions, and the way I am when I'm with other people, the way I am with this person versus this person. This person triggers me, this thing triggers me. Constant inner analysis. And so this puts us in the mode of the magician, of the alchemist, of the scientist. This is that kind of a person. And although, like if we're using Robert Moore's system of these archetypes of the royal and the warrior and the magician and the lover, this practice requires a lot of the magician. It requires the others too, but it requires a lot of the magician. And for people who don't have a whole lot of magician going on, well, they need to work on that. But this is really for people who are naturally inclined to be analytical people. That it's alchemical. So the next stage in this is that, and these can all kind of go on at the same time. These might unfold over periods of years. These might be embraced all at the same time. But the next stage of this is that inner analysis that you're doing, that inner mindfulness that of the processes of the psyche, now start to turn to, and this naturally comes up anyway, starts to turn to, well, why am I? It starts to discover aspects of the psyche which are destructive, which are dark, which we don't want to look at. They give us pushback. They're resonating at 180 degrees out of phase. They're in cognitive dissonance. They're in denial. They're pushed back, but they start to leak up, and you start to notice, because you're so good at mindfulness now, you really start to notice when you start to get nasty stuff coming up, nasty thoughts, nasty feelings, addictive cycles, all the yucky stuff, the shadow stuff, now becomes your primary target of your mindfulness.
Right.
This is your shadow work.
Right, and it is very alchemical and psychic, because what you're going to start seeing is that you're going to attract mirrors of this shadow stuff.
In fact, they're already there.
They're already there, but you're going to start to notice them. And you're going to start to have to process them.
That's right.
And take responsibility for them. Mm-hmm. And so this is where people start to get challenged. This can be challenging, because it's going to bring up all this yucky stuff that you've been just pushing down, or that's been passed on to you.
Right.
And
The sources of your inner conflict and your
Right.
relational conflict.
right.
You're getting into conflict. It's already happening.
And it
You're
can be
internally conflicted, and you're relationally conflicted with certain people. And the sources of that conflict are what you're going to start diving down into.
and this can also be addictions, physical illness.
Yeah, that's
anything
internal
like-
conflict.
Yeah, so all the places that you're weak are, once you start this mindfulness, this analysis, you will start to get back all these areas where your conscious experience, your conscious mind has not been
ego
wanting.
state.
Yeah,
Yes.
has not been wanting.
Doesn't want to
face
look
it.
at those things. You start to go into those things. They start to remind you of old memories. They start to make you sick to your stomach. You start to get, triggered in one way or another. You don't want to look at that. You start to analyze your own bad behavior, and you start to notice how you want to project it onto the other person. And then you realize, well, I must have some kind of part of the equation too. It must be partially my fault, and I'm gonna have to look at that, and you're gonna get pushback. All that has to be gone into. You start to have fears around things. You're gonna have to look at all that kind of stuff. This is a boot camp. So the shadow work is like a Marine boot camp, and it goes on forever. Just like military training or martial art training or whatever, warrior training goes on forever. You keep on
Right.
having to retrain yourself and update your training, but you have an initial stage of years where you are in this boot camp. And so you are
Yeah, it never stops, by the
right.
way.
No, it keeps going, but
It
you go through
keeps
this boot
going
camp.
because you're polishing the mirror throughout
Right.
your life.
Yep.
You're refining your consciousness, your soul,
Right.
and each stage
Right.
you develop, and you notice more and more areas where you need to do more
Yeah.
processing and more
as you
work.
as you refine, as you clean, then you go, okay, there's more to be done. As you
Yeah.
refine and clean, so
This is why it's so hard, and why people probably want this easy, like Americanized or Westernized. Oh yeah, I'm gonna do shadow work. Oh yeah. And it's
Well-
just like, I'm just gonna face all this dark stuff, and then it's all gonna be over, and I'm gonna
just this thing that I do for a little while. I take this class, I read this book, and then I kind of just start doing this a little bit, and then that's kind of enough, and then I move on.
right.
No, so let me say something here. So that this, in terms of alchemy, the shadow is related to the negrito stage, which is sort of the first stage. And then in the most basic formulation of alchemy, you have maybe three other stages of, just in the simplest version, two other stages of albedo and rubedo. And so it's negrito, albedo, rubedo, which is the blackening, the whitening, the reddening. And each of these stages has its own sort of archetypal connotations, mythological connotations. But I find that it's almost it's useful to look at these alchemical stages and to just kind of know what the Hermetic philosophers have been postulating over the centuries, to kind of see what the territory is, even though the way it's been postulated is completely mythological and artistic and not fully rational. But it's good to kind of look at that stuff. But really, it's not really important to really even understand all this detail about alchemy and how to do alchemy and all that kind of stuff if you just get a robust method of doing shadow work. Because that boot camp, it's kind of like everything that you need to know about being a good soldier is right there in the original boot camp. And so if you can really just make the shadow work a primary focus in life, then everything else, that the purification that comes from doing this work naturally uncovers other stages and clarifies things, and then the psyche can start to present the next stage, the next stage, the next stage. The outer world will reflect your clarification, and things will start to move, and the journey will move, the quest will move, and you don't really have to be like, well, next stop on the alchemical train is this stage if you're using this system and blah, blah, blah. I'm using the 9-step system, and so next, I'm right here now, and the next going to be this. It's not going to work out that way. That's kind of an archetypal kind of movie or storyline, but your story is going to be different. It's going to be similar, but different. So all you really have to focus on in terms of alchemy, besides maybe getting a general understanding of what it is to just get this shadow work down. And so this is what we're always talking about. This is what our YouTube channel is full of, what's in our book, what we're always talking about. And so really, we won't go into it too deeply here, but this is where, yes, you are admitting into consciousness anything that's dark, anything that gives you pushback. You're using your triggers as a doorway into something that's repressed, into some shadow material. So you're actively using triggers. Triggers make you feel bad. Triggers make you feel guilty. They make you feel angry. They make you feel fearful, whatever they are.
Hopeless.
Hopeless. So triggers are not something that you like, but triggers are a doorway into something pathological, something wounded, something out of place, something abandoned, something exiled way back in the psyche. So that is where that's the cave you have to go into. So you use triggers to go down deeper and to inquire and to start pulling up material, whether it's thoughts, whether it's feelings, and then you process that material by accepting it.
Yeah, that's why you have to have some emotional processing.
That's right.
A system
That's right.
to process and clear the emotional body. And we cannot stress this enough. This is the number one way that you are going to be able to deal with all this trigger material, all this stuff that feels horrible, right? You're feeling terrible. These triggers. And the only way to start to clear and transmute this is you have to sit with the emotional energy, sit with the trigger, and allow it to process like a small child falling on the ground, and they need to cry and they need to be able to process
and
the
parent
full
has to get involved
cycle.
and the parent has to hold them and say it's okay.
And you are responsible for doing this, for being your own parent and doing this for yourself. Right.
You have to reparent those little parts, those ostracized parts which have been poked at. The trigger is not it's the part that's been triggered. It's the part that's been poked at. It's an ostracized, exiled part that has been poked at, a little layer, you could say, of the psyche that's still got a little wound in it, and it has been poked at, and now it's recycling an old stage of consciousness, you know, from a long time ago that never really fully got integrated. And so now it needs to cry, it needs to have its temper tantrum, it needs to have its emotional process. And the conscious you has to sit there and allow and in fact encourage this process, and we call it emotional processing, which is based on John Ruskin's emotional clearing.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is
our
way of doing it is more of the extreme sport version of it, the more warrior way, is you're using the trigger that makes you feel bad right there and processing the emotion as soon as you feel it, being with it and doing this. Whereas with John Ruskin's emotional clearing, you get into a state of meditation, and then you start to do the same process of allowing these emotional and this trauma to go through you. Both ways work, but if you really want to start to move through this blocked energy, this blocked emotional trauma, then the way that we are saying works incredibly
Right.
well.
So this is in our book Shadow Tech in
Yeah.
the chapter called Emotional Processing. And yes, it's based on John Ruskin's method, but he generally does it in meditation.
Yes.
And we're doing it like right then and there when you're triggered. So this is the subject. This is number 3 on my list. This is the shadow work part. And there's much more to shadow, not much more, but there's a little bit more to shadow work than this. This is also about catching your projections, noticing when you start to project judgments onto other people, and you start to see darkness in other people, and you feel this kind of attraction to wanting to inwardly assault other people.
Or it could be projecting your diamond, or projecting, that's the other side of it.
Okay, but
Yeah.
that's the golden shadow projection. But I'm just talking about general shadow projection here, and that is so. This is that you start to notice how you actually just put it right in there. It's the same deal. The golden shadow projection is where you idolize other people and how smart and lovely they are and all of that, and they're attractive to you. And you idolize those people.
Well, I could say, because I've been studying narcissism and borderline personality disorder as of late, and I noticed the borderline personality disorder traits in myself, and I've noticed that that's what I've been doing my whole life, is projecting this object of perfection out into the world, into either, rock stars, or into my relationships with a man, to make them the projection of everything that's going to make me okay.
Yeah.
So that, in a way, that's like the golden shadow, because what I'm projecting is a part of myself that's been damaged and hasn't actualized.
Yeah. I don't know enough about, we just started looking at this. I don't know enough about borderline personality disorder to be able to say, how does a borderline's behavior and thought process relate to shadow projection, whether it's dark shadow projection or golden shadow projection.
This is just my intuition about it.
So, so you're catching your projections, you're reeling in your own projections, you're recognizing your projections, and that can go into another talk where we can talk about the substance of projections. You are integrating exiled parts. This is the internal family systems model. You are working with the pain body in Eckhart Tolle's system, and you are analyzing the shadow that shows up within dreams. You're also recognizing how that destructive things, catastrophic things that happen in life, in the external world that affect you, are basically linked, causally linked to your own shadow material inside, and using the external world, things that happen shadowy in the external world, as a way to trace back your own shadow material. So then also recently I've been talking about using Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants model to be able to look at the shadow in all 4 quadrants, where, just very briefly, in that system, the upper left-hand quadrant is where you're analyzing your own shadow material, just as the traditional Jungian kind of way. But then you're also, in the upper right-hand, is where you recognize where the shadow also has physical attributes in the actual body. This is where you get psychosomatic symptoms, chronic diseases of all kinds, physical diseases, mental illness is, the way in which the brain, the body, your neurochemistry, all of that is is screwed up, right? And so the disease in general is in the upper right hand quadrant, and this is a function of the shadow. What's repressed and dark in the shadow, in the psychological shadow, has a manifestation in the physical body, and most people are not getting this. And so that you can use the 4-quadrant system to understand that. Then you go down to the bottom 2 quadrants, and you have a study of the collective shadow. And this is what we would call this is the domain of the red-pilled individual, right? And so you're studying on the lower left quadrant, you're studying the shadow in culture and all the ways in which our collective communication and media and so-called culture is manifesting the shadow. And then in the lower right hand, how our actual civilization, the structure of the way we put together society, our economic system, our political system, how that's corrupt, and what I call the collective deep state in my little 4-quadrant map that we put out recently. So this is a way of embracing the shadow in a holistic way. And I would say that now that I'm kind of comfortable talking about it in the 4 quadrants model, I just can plop that right into here. And I would say this is another way of starting to embrace and touch on the shadow in a very holistic way and start to go through this. So this is, to be red-pilled, so to speak, is itself another initiation. So it is an initiation to go through a dark night of the soul or some kind of personal crash that makes you go, I got to do shadow work. And then it is also that may not actually lead to a second initiation that puts you in touch with all the collective shadow. And you may still think that, this or that political situation or whatever is just whatever chance or whatever. You may not recognize that it's all manifestations of the shadow of the collective psyche. So this is a major aspect of this work, and if this is all that you really are even focusing on, this is it's so much of the core of what it is that we're talking about that you almost don't even need to put anything out more than that. You just lead up to this, put this shadow work out there, embellish it, talk about it, and then put it on people's laps, and there you go. That's all you need. But there is more. And so the 2 other things that I'll put on, and we don't need to go into, we've kind of gone into a lot of the core of this already. One is that we already talked about this. I had this in here later on. We put this right up front. You brought it up and put it right about the Imago Dei, the purpose of life, the God image within you. And this is where, because the shadow work and inner work and mindfulness and self-analysis can all be thought of kind of as a secular scientific kind of a process, and doesn't necessarily need to be seen in a spiritual light or a religious light. But that would be to cut this thing in 2 and throw away half of it. And we wouldn't want to do that.
No, because it's very important. Part of shadow work is just as a child, we're building up the ego and the individual. It's like throughout your life, your ego gets, you go through many ego deaths.
Yes.
And so
Countless.
as you're going through constantly ego deaths, as you're polishing the big S self, or that jewel of the archetype of you, what you start to notice is, yes, I'm just a little ant on this greater planet of Earth with all this mystery and all this beauty and horror and the whole thing. And you become more spiritual. It's a natural development
Yeah.
of the psyche, of the individuation, that you do everything becomes more meaningful.
Yes.
Everything, you start to feel the connective nature of all.
Yeah. Yes. That absolutely happens.
So you're not going to be able, if you're really doing this, you're going to be getting more meaning and more spiritual as your life goes on, not less, is what I would. That's been the case for me.
That is true. Here I have, and it's just the way I wrote this down is sloppy, but that through the clarification process of the psyche, through getting deeper and deeper to the grail of the archetype of you, as C. Michael Smith calls it, the Imago Dei, that through this continual clarification and I mean reunification with one's highest purpose within, and the trusting and the allowance of this hologram to reveal itself, that process itself is because that highest purpose of you and your lifetime is a reflection of it. It is a divine spark, as the Gnostics call it. That your manifestation of your highest purpose in this lifetime is the deity, is God, is the universe evolving. Mm-hmm. It is the universe evolving, and in the evolution, in the life and the evolution of all consciousness, all of the creation, is much of it is just repetition. Atoms just keep on fluctuating and spinning, and molecules and things, just the seasons just keep on going, and it's a repetition, and there's a constant habitual kind of over and over and over, and that's always going on. And then there is the manifestation of novelty, things that are truly new, that kind of chunk the universe forward in complexity and forward in purpose. And that you, to the degree you are unconscious, to the degree you are not participating in personal evolution, well, then that's just the universe just going, okay, another human came into the world, another human died.
Sometimes somebody can be unconscious and still put a little bit of spark out to stimulate this evolution. Even the evil, psychopathic, they're all part of this system. It's like this. It's the way I see it, at least, is that there is awareness built in to this system, into the biosphere, at infinite levels of awareness, and that awareness is focusing things forward. I think that everything is self-aware. Every holon is self-aware. The human being is the most self-aware holon on this planet. But everything is self-aware, and everything is moving, and evolution is happening. But to the degree that you can become more self-aware, then you can actually you can actually start to move that evolutionary process. In fact, I would say that evolution cannot occur without entities increasing self-awareness. Yeah, I think that's the case. But as you're doing this work,
when you're unconscious, and you're just unconscious in the world, and you're just going along, it is when something snaps and you get an epiphany, so to speak, a flash of insight, of awareness, right? That's that Gnostic idea, that flash, that epiphany, that insight that you go, ah, and that's when you say, I'm going to do something different now. I just realized, oh, this is why my mother is the way she is, or this is what's going on at my job, and this is why I should actually go over here instead of doing this. That is evolution happening, and it's happening through heightened awareness. Now, if you are making a spiritual practice, a religious practice of increasing awareness, consciously doing things to increase your awareness and increase your ability to be self-aware, you are actively participating in evolving the universe.
Yes, that is true, but don't forget you're an ant.
Yeah, you always have to come back to you're an ant. You always have to come back to you're just a tiny little part of these things.
And that these epiphanies, yes, it's part of the process of your own personal individuation and the collective evolution of the planet. Yet, there still is a mysterious nature that we'll never know. And the only reason I keep bringing this up,
yeah, it's good,
is because our culture right now is so filled with grandiosity and narcissism, and
it's almost like it's almost like at this point it's almost like just a layer of thin grandiosity and narcissism, and below it is the recognition that we are a wreck. Yeah. Right below it is the recognition everybody knows we're a wreck. And it's just this compensatory narcissism and grandiosity at the top. And it's so fragile it can crack at any moment. But this what you're saying about, if I start to form my own personal religion of how I have an inner spark of God in me, and that by polishing this and bringing light to this and putting this into the world, that naturally the warning that comes at that point is that could go to your head. And
more than your head. Right. It can take over
It's a saying. It can go to your head. It's a saying. That can lead to grandiosity, to hubris, to arrogance. And we're trying to actually, that's pathology, and we're trying to work that out.
Yeah, because I can only speak from my own experience, and that every time that I think that I've gotten to another phase, I will have more
you'll have more lessons to learn, more clearing to do, more ego deaths. But let me make this clear. What I'm saying here, because I'm bringing this into the religious domain here. Okay? And so how is this a religious practice or a spiritual practice, and not just a secular kind of psychological work that we're just doing science work, you know?
I understand.
Okay. So that it is through this concept, or this recognition really, of the divine in you. This is back to this Gnostic understanding, that this recognition of this divine spark in you, and the connection between the divine spark and the whole, and that this work, this inner development work, besides just cleaning us up so that we can be better parents or better business owners or whatever, it's not just about that. It's about a process that is refining and clarifying the psyche so that your highest purpose, which is holographically tied to the whole cosmos, can come into the world and actually evolve the world. That itself is religious.
Yeah, that is religious.
And you might say, well, that's dangerous and it could flood the ego and lead to grandiosity, and that might be the pitfall, and maybe that's why most people can't do this.
What I would say is that through that understanding of the connection that your own personal individuation has an effect on the whole
Yes.
of the universe.
That's right.
I've had that epiphany and I understand it very deeply. And what I would add to that is that if we are continually polishing the mirror and continually doing this shadow work, then we develop a moral structure, a personal moral code that we will always be able to let go and let God, or let the mysterious really guide the show versus our own ego
Yep.
mind.
Definitely. And now now if you take this work and you open the door to how this thing has a religious or spiritual basis for it, by what we just said. It's the as above, so below connection between the individual self and the creation. And once you accept that by working on yourself, that this is a divine spiritual practice, religious practice, and that it's connecting you back. Religion means to tie back, to connect back. And that this kind of inner work is doing that, and that it is releasing your higher purpose from, it's releasing your destiny from your fate, right, as Michael Meade would call it. Then once you open to the door and say, okay, now yes, this is religious in nature, now we can go from there and start saying, well, what else contributes to this religious practice, right? And then we can start putting in more boundaries and more things like that, just like how every religious system has. All right, once you accept
Well,
Christ
that's why
and
Moses
Yahweh and the
went
whole
up on the hill and
exactly
had to get the
right.
10 Commandments.
Once you accept that God is there and that everything is happening in accordance with the Creator
Right.
and stuff, then you can go, well, what does the Creator want us to do, and how do we best fit in with that and all that? So that's next. But I just first wanted to establish that there and this. And that's how, if you relate what we're saying to the Jungian system, and it is directly tied to it, then you could kind of say that this is the creation of a personal religion, and that we're not interested in creating a collective religious doctrine and having a congregation and all that stuff. We're not talking about that kind of a thing. We're talking about this is a personal religion, a personal spirituality. People don't like the word religion, and I've already said it a bunch of times already, and probably some people who would watch this would be like, oh man, it keeps saying religion, because there's this negative connotation for a lot of people in our society.
Because most maps end up being a map versus the actual work, and even Carl Jung constantly was talking about this, that the Jungians were making maps of his maps instead of actually doing the process itself.
Exactly.
So this is the danger of all religions, all spiritual practices.
We're not talking about so that's exactly the point, is that do the work is much more important than try to create. I'm creating a map right now, but it's just a throwaway guide. It's like, okay, thanks for the information. Okay, now I'm on to what I'm doing, right? That's what every individual needs to do. Take everybody else's map and say, thanks, I think I can kind of see where I am in there, whatever, good to know, now move on. But that's different from having a religious doctrine that you're not in our group unless you do this to a T. It's not the same. So, that when I say religious, I mean spiritual, as people use the term now. But more specifically, if you look at the anthropologist Mircea Eliade, And for example, the book The Sacred and the Profane. And you see where he defines profane man and homo religiosus, right? So this is man who lives in a worldview of everything being sacred and everything being connected to the creation. And this is the creation happening through us. And that's how sacred the sacred mindset is. And then there's the profane mindset where the individual looks at the external world out there as a separate object and sort of becomes their own God, judging the world as an external object, separate from nature, separate from the world. That's profane man. So I'm using Eliade's definition when I say religious. I'm talking about a sacred mindset. So that's just to clarify that up. So now we're about to over here, but it's such a big subject and everything. So this is sort of some points here. We can just very briefly in 5 minutes go through this. These are kind of pointers type things or aspects that pertain to the way we see things, and that as we develop, there is a continual move towards taking 100% responsibility, not only for everything that happens in your internal state, not only everything that happens between you and other people, but everything that happens in the world. Now that is incredibly difficult thing to do, to take 100% responsibility for everything that happens in the world. And maybe if you were to think that if the only way to do that is to basically be a solipsist or something and think, well, I am the world. But it's actually just it's not an achievable thing. You can't, it's just a continual process of trying to take responsibility for a wider and wider sphere of influence. But it starts, a lot of people would throw this out and say, I have to be responsible for the planet and climate change and all this kind of stuff, but they haven't even become responsible for their own triggers, right? So let's start with the internal state, and then you move out from there.
You're not going to throw tomato sauce at a Vincent van Gogh painting,
right,
and glue yourself
to the wall.
Which
is what these climate activists did recently, right?
That's not taking responsibility.
That's not taking responsibility. No, that's not taking responsibility. So, second on this little short list is the first alchemical maxim. If we're going to say this is alchemy, the first alchemical maxim, as above, so below, has to be sort of one of the master maxims for life. And that is the recognition that everything external has a reflection internally in the psyche, and that everything that's occurring in the psyche will gradually cause the individual to change the external world accordingly. And that there is this sort of gradual synchronization between what's happening in your world and what's happening in your state. And that and then back to responsibility, it says that because the primary domain over which I have access is my own mind and body, then in order to shift the world, I will shift my own mind and body. And then I will watch and see how that affects the world. And there is a belief, or not just a belief, a knowing that the external world of one's own perception is directly tied to, linked with, and resonating with one's own consciousness inside. And that you have to look for reflections, whether you call it synchronicity or through circumstances, but you look for these reflections and you interpret the external world as you interpret a dream. Mm-hmm. And so that is part of this work too. A personal code of ethics.
We already talked about
that shall not be deprecated.
Right.
right? And so, I mean,
That's your moral code.
that's your moral code. And that if there was sort of like, well, you know how shadow work is we talk about doing specific things. Here's another area where you can do something specific, and that's write out your personal code of ethics, your personal constitution, your personal moral code, and figure out what it is, and figure out what are the most basic moral. And you can use any kind of way of doing this. I put my own together, put it out there, and then you may update it, you may clarify it over time, but you never break it ever, because that's part of your personal religion. You never break that. If you break those things on there, if once you recognize these are my moral ethical standards that I believe, these are where I align with truth and goodness and beauty and these kinds of things. Once you realize this is where I am in that, and then you break those rules, you just break yourself in a real bad way. And the more you break yourself and break those rules, the more you fracture yourself, and then the more you go away from what we're talking about here. So writing out your own personal code of ethics and then never breaking those rules is incredibly important. And other stuff we've talked about in here, and then something about will, that all obstacles, riddles, conundrums, questions that arise on the path, they will be addressed. They will be overcome. They will be integrated. Those questions will be answered. They will be addressed, and that you will not walk away from those things. You will not shove things into a bag and throw it behind you and say, I'm not going to address that. You will address every single thing that is an ongoing conundrum, riddle, or obstacle. You will address that. And if you're not ready to address it now, you'll do it next year or you'll do it a decade from now. But you will do it. And that will has to be there. That warrior's will has to be there. So otherwise, this isn't going anywhere. And then the last thing on here is, well, we already discussed this, is the perspective, because this is called Alchemical Life Art. And it is the perspective, because you could look at life as, you can use the metaphor of a game. Life's a game, right? And you want to succeed in the game. It's a game of Monopoly or a game of Risk, right? You can see life as a game. You can see it as a... there was one other thing that I was thinking is kind of another one that's a lot of people use. Not a sacred one like what we're talking about. There's another. I'll have to skip over it, but the way we're looking at it, well, there's also the quest, right? Life is a quest, the hero's journey, right? It's a quest, and that aligns with what we're doing. And this is more, though, it is that, but it is on top of that a work of art, and that life itself is the clay. It is the substance that we are molding. Life itself, the psyche itself, the reflections, everything of my reality is actually what I'm working with as like a director, a movie director.
Yeah, we've called it living in the movie.
Living in the movie.
Many times.
Yes, and so you're not actually the creator. So you're really a co-director with the creator. But you are a director to the degree that a director is, they know a little something about everything about movie making, and they're getting involved in every aspect of the lighting, of the scenery, of the wardrobe, the script, and they're consciously being involved in every aspect of this creation. And that's what's happening here as a director of the movie of life, right? Okay, I know you're tired, and
No, what
that's the end.
my robot
Ta-da.
is just thinking about errands, basically.
Oh, you got to do some errands.
We have to do errands.
Oh, we do actually, but both of us do. Okay, so that's the best that I could do on this for today, and we'll keep on doing it and adding more, subtracting, or whatever. And so let's see how long that took us. What time is it now?
It's like almost 3:45.
Oh my.
Yeah.
That was long. So I know Stephanie has been on with us the whole time. Sorry to make you wait that long, Stephanie. I thought we were going to do this in an hour, and so if you're still there, feel free to unmute yourself, and I'm going to unpin, just a minute, unpin ourselves so that we can see you. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
How's it going? Oh, I can put my earphones in here. Yeah. Were you are able to sustain yourself for that long?
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. This is something I look forward to. So thank you
okay,
guys.
fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I know that you've been out a long time. And
Yeah.
as Melissa, you said the robot's going. So I don't want to keep you.
No. We'll
I just have
Whatever.
a couple thoughts. And I'll work from the end and kind of work backwards if I
Yes.
can. I took a lot of notes.
Oh, okay.
One thing you were just talking about living in the movie, I thought it was kind of interesting because as folks similar
Folks.
to us,
Yes.
it's, let me just ask my question. I feel as though, what is the quester's position in the universe in modernity? And
Right.
and also, it's one of those things where we all know that when people get an inclination or something like shadow work becomes trendy, it's easy for people to start thinking that they've become masters. But then the people who have been dedicated for a significant amount of time,
Yeah.
it feels like there's an awareness of the continuation of the process that sometimes I question what is the actual like extrinsic form that this could look like for a quester that knows that they're going to continually be on their journey. But then how does it look like in terms of like educating or teaching or sharing? And when this is very much a part of your entire life, you live and you breathe this sort of
Yeah.
work and material,
Yes.
then to me it brings into question everything and maybe everybody that has typically been involved in the production of me wanting to externalize something with this work as a quester. Because then I feel like almost every system has to be brought into, if you're going to make a movie or a production of something, and you would typically have hired hands and people and things and the way you produce things. And it seems like almost, this is maybe not accurate, but I'm just going to say it, like the rest of the world, we want to work with people who are also doing this sort of work. So that's kind of where I feel as though the externalization of your movie or your production as a quester, wanting to put something out in the world, having the humility to know where we sit, that we're always going to be doing this work, but also simultaneously knowing that there might be a value to sharing this, but in a way that we're connecting with the right production people and in spaces. So just curious kind of about that. Like really is like my question would be like, what do you guys feel is this modern day ancient alchemist in modernity? Like, is it just, for me personally, I'll just tell you that very often I live and I eat and I breathe this for a long time. It's just who I am.
Yeah.
And I keep a lot of this part of my life kind of more away
Yeah.
from public spaces, just because I'm not really involved in too many public spaces, to be honest with you. But then simultaneously, it is that little bit of a personal trigger, which I've worked on, which is, well, here's everyone else and their brother Joe, who just was initiated into trigger work yesterday, and now they think they're a professional. And here I am just wondering, like,
Yeah.
do I have a plate? Is there something I should be doing with this externally? Because it feels like I want to find this balance between living my life in this work and externalizing it with like minds. But there's so much distortion, it feels to me like, in aspects of the field, that I don't want it to come out non-innocent, and I don't want the purity to be just shoved into some sort of box where it shouldn't be.
Well, Stephanie, when you first asked the question, the epiphany, what came to me, an answer came to me, and then I just started applying the answer to all of the other nodes of your question to see if it answered all of those, and it did.
Okay, great.
And so that is that if we answered the question by so we're talking about this work, right? We're talking about this inner work process, this alchemy stuff. And then we're also talking about being in the world as this role, or putting this work in some way as a social or collective function. So it's kind of those kind of two things. There's the work, and then there's its interfacing with the world. And the same questions that you're asking are all asked, and they are all they're all asked by the artist. So the essential artist, the artiste, the person who is driven. We said director earlier, but you could just say maybe like a painter, which is very much more simple. A painter, and so the work is the work of painting. The questing aspect is, on one hand, they're questing for information or techniques so that they can be a better painter, or do what they see in their head, make it come out better. So there's a technique part that they're always questing for. But then they're also questing for the actual creative spirit, right? Because an artist they'll be prolific for a while, and then it will fade away, and then they'll want to try to recultivate that flame and bring it back and get that energy back. And so there's always that ebbing and flowing of the creative process, and there's always that quest. So the artist their main focus is the work of the art, and that is what's really compelling them, and that's all they can do, and they're surviving on that alone. But then the artist says, I'm spending all this time doing this. It would be great if I could sell my paintings. It would be great if I could get a write-up in the local newspaper, or maybe I should make a gallery so that people can come and see and buy my art. And the artist starts to wonder, how should I put myself and my art in the world? And then they start doing interviews, and then people start asking them, well, how do you think about yourself? Well, what kind of an artist are you? What style do you paint? And then you have to start thinking about your persona, and how do you look to the world, and all that kind of stuff. So all these things that apply to what we're doing also apply to the artist. And so if you can look at it in that way, and that can bring it back down to size a little bit, because everyone, to be an artist and to put art in the world, and is a very special, and it doesn't necessarily have to be grandiose, but very sacred thing. But it's also something that millions and millions of people are doing. And if we start to take our work and bust it out of that, and and make it all grandiose and how I have this new system to save the world. It's kind of like the artist saying, you know, it's like some musician saying, well, I am the greatest composer on the face of the earth, and everybody knows my music, of course. It gets very
It
ugly.
also would be like Roger Waters doing pop music.
Oh,
You know what I'm saying? It wasn't enough that you would put out just this incredible piece of art. You would be doing something so that you could reach the general humanity versus
Right.
maybe just a certain group who likes what it is
I mean,
you're doing.
so we can have this layer of social service and giving back and all of that kind of stuff. But the artist, the layer of giving my music or my art back to the world, that's there. And but it isn't the primary function. The primary function is to access the creative drive and to combine that with technique and actually make works of art. And so
Yeah.
all of your questions are answered if you will just frame yourself as an artist, and if you will
Okay.
engage in this work as an artist.
Right. So, okay. So this is what came up for me last week, and it's so interesting that you guys kind of finished up on this. And this really only is the last thing that I want to really
No, it's
say
okay.
is
Yeah,
that
go ahead.
the importance of Melissa, you were talking about bringing up the climate activists who threw the tomato sauce on the Van Gogh. So this hit me because about a week prior, my colleague and I were talking about this and talking about in the world of art, an artist, that this is a shadow, I feel, and I'm sure it lives within me, and I'm sure it lives within other people, and that's why I want to bring it up. Is both her and I agreed that the way let's just say the feminine, let's just call the feminine the creatrix, the creator, right? The way that she's supported herself or attempted to support herself in the past has elements of selling out to try to be supported. But then the other thing is that we now value collectively, it feels, this could be my shadow, but it appears that we value the mummified pieces that are locked up in museums. It's like somehow we've put these beautiful pieces and framed them and set them in a place where we have to pay and to observe them, but there's no real interaction with the artist. There's no real like dimensionality of like what was going on when you were going through this. It's just like
The function of art is not part of the culture. The art, the product, some old product from 1800s is on the wall and everyone wants to see it and all that. But the function of art and what is art and how is art made and what does art serve is not, well, just very, very quickly, and then I want you to say something, but in the Ken Wilber thing that I've been talking about lately, he calls this modernity flatland.
Yeah, I was going to say this is what we were talking about last week with the difference between depth.
That's right. This was the subject of the last one. Right. So depth versus versus width or breadth. And so modernity is very concerned with making new stuff and this version, this strawberry version and that other berry version, and there's 1,000 different versions of sparkly water that are available, and all these techniques for making sparkly water and all these different phones and everything. There's all these options and this diversity of stuff and techniques, but that's all just quantity. But then there is the depth part, which is all about quality. It's all about the quality of what you're doing. You could have one type of sparkly water or 2 or 3 types, and they're the highest quality with the lowest impact on the planet for the lowest amount of money, right? And that would be on the depth dimension. And then you wouldn't even be concerned with, why would I need to make 1,000 different versions of this? I'm working on creating the best. And the whole process of, and then passing that on to your children and teaching the art of that craft to your children or to other people in the community and being a mentor and all that, that's depth stuff. So this is a philosophical, this is a problem of modernity where this is what ripped the spirituality away. This is what ripped the subjective experience away. And so you go to the doctor, they don't even ask you what your subjective experience is.
Right.
They look at you like an object. And so it's a
Right.
flatland. You're just an object. It's a world of external objects. And the internal relational or the internal state, the subjective state of feeling of quality and interrelational quality is not even a concern. It's how many people can I reach on my Zoom call, not how much can we help each other, and is this technology serving us, or do we need to meet up in person? And it's so your conundrum there is a conundrum, and then you have the entire society that's so trained on this superficiality that young people, they don't even know that. You open up the magazine, the art magazine, the cultural magazine of Houston, Texas, and you open it up and you see what's in there, and it's just like, it's all, what is it, social justice stuff or whatever, or something like that. It's not even, it should be all about, since everyone is an artist anyway, it should be all about making art, sharing with people how to make art, workshops about art, art shows in the community, and making art itself a priority, and taking vacations and other stuff that people do and working 60 hours, throwing that away and bringing art back into their life. Or it could be parenting, it could be, it doesn't have to be art, it could be parenting. It's about depth and quality, not about distraction and things and stuff. So this is a problem. And so now you ask, well, then how do I take my art, even if it's a spiritual method or something like that, and bring that to a world that's only interested in superficial, fancy, shiny stuff? And that I show them this, and it's all difficult and deep, and it's medicinal, and it's like process oriented, and it takes years or decades, and it's just a whole way of life. How do I show that to this profane world? And if I go to the religious people who are still getting something out of church and all of that, and they're more affiliated with this, they're going to say, oh, I already got mine. I already got my spiritual religious thing. I don't need yours. And so what do you do in the world with this? Well, the artist is facing the same problem. And then I guess the best we can do right now is just be with each other and encourage each other, and start to form communities of like-minded people who can encourage each other, and then start to slowly influence the society to come back to depth. And then possibly the society itself, which is so fragile because it doesn't have depth, is going to crash. And then what's going to reemerge is going to be much deeper and more substantive.
One thing that I would say, because I was thinking about what it is that you're trying to do as far as bringing it to the medical system, right?
Yeah.
The one thing that I think that you or someone could bring into the medical system as it is now is some sort of an emotional processing method that anyone can do. And somebody who is dealing with a physical issue
Yep.
You know, a serious physical issue, there's going to be psychosomatic energy and emotional trauma involved in that.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the one like physical, like
Yep.
one thing
Yeah.
that you could bring
You
or
could.
someone could bring to that whole to the medical system is emotional processing method. Maybe you would have people, you train other people to do that for their patients.
It's
Yeah.
also it's very simple, but
Yeah.
it's also very difficult because we grow up, we train ourselves to, when we're feeling triggered and emotional or we're in a down place, to, you know, eat some sugar, drink some wine, distract ourselves, do exercise or anything to distract away from that feeling. And in this process, you actually welcome that feeling up and welcome it to start to move through your body, and it's uncomfortable.
You would have to have
So-
facilitators who could be there with the patient, allow them to talk about what it is that they're feeling,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And allow them to let that material go up, and then you're just there with the patient.
But what do you do in the situation
That's
that
what
where yeah, no, I agree with you completely. It's a simple thing. It's, at least from our experience, it's something we know about. But what do you do where a big part of the way the whole system is designed right now,
Yeah.
and the reason why so many people are in the system, is because they're avoiding the difficult stuff.
Well, this is so important because, as you guys said, how they've been trained and conditioned, they're just starting to introduce extrinsic modalities of dealing with emotions and hardship, right? So, oh,
Right.
maybe you should try yoga. I heard that was good. Like,
Right.
so
They're just barely there.
They're
I
just
heard an
barely
ad
scratching.
recently where they're talking about Kaiser Permanente, and the NPR voice lady is saying, at Kaiser, we look at the whole you.
Yeah,
we
right.
look at you know, I don't remember how she was saying it, but they were trying to introduce the idea that we're starting to listen to you. We listen better. We want to know what's going on
Right.
in your subjective
Right.
space.
Well,
they're
what's-
just now starting to do that.
Yeah, they're just starting, and we all know that, you know, just starting out, it's easy. And in these particular systems, I found from the past, I'm open for change, is that it's easy to hijack ideology without really bringing on someone who actually has the depth of experience to cultivate a
Yeah.
greater change. So I understand that, and I love this idea. And actually, this is something that we've been working on. And actually, Scott and I have been doing a lot of talking about creating workbooks and things like that. But the other thing that I wanted to say about art is that I have there's kind of like something deeper within me besides this particular emotional processing method, which I think is great. But
Yeah.
I also have this desire to very deeply express myself
Yes.
in a way where I know I have to be limited to do this service. You know, and sometimes I feel as though, you know, I'd really like to break out as my fullest, most complete self. And I feel like breaking out in this community, I have to sequester a little bit of my
Right.
fullness, which I am okay with.
Right.
But also, I loved how you guys. One last thing was the production of art, right? It's like if we're teaching an art class or teaching
Yeah.
something, there's an expectation that at some point you are going to produce something that's
Right.
beautiful, right?
Right.
And really, in this like alchemical life art or life science,
Yeah.
it's like actually I'm sharing, I'm mentoring, I'm not coaching. I'm sharing in a way where you're going to produce something through you. It's an opening of you producing the art through you. I'm not making the art.
No. Well, yeah. Well, I guess that's. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I know what
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying
Yeah.
because
It's not your. It's the method. It's like you're teaching art and you're teaching art classes, and you're up there and you're showing how to do brush strokes or how to mix paints or whatever it is. Sure, you're showing people a technique, but but once they learn the technique, then that's it. They've got it
Okay,
now. They do their own thing.
here's my problem. This
Yep.
is where I feel I'm a little bit caught between showing a technique and sharing my story as a form of teaching. Because something within sharing a technique, I don't want anybody to say, like in traditional education, let me mimic and memorize what she's doing because then I'll have a better life. So there's
Right.
something within me that feels like pure storytelling
Right.
is something where they can choose and select the inspiration or motivation through
Right.
what's coming up organically. So I'm kind of having this little bit of dilemma in this emotional processing method and this stuff that I'm trying to do for patients, because I want to present something in a way where it doesn't seem like a course.
So if you're okay, so you're basically describing to us that you have a okay, back to the artist. We're sitting around the round table, the writers of a movie, and we're saying, well, we have this. We kind of want it to be based on whatever archetype of movie, of story, and this, and we kind of have these ideas and all that, and we're talking all about kind of the setup, like what's the setup of this thing, but it the let me go back actually as a better metaphor, because it's a personal thing. It's just you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can go to my own experience as an artist of being a musician. And I can say that I'm not ready to sit down and try to compose a song until I have at least one part, or probably two parts that go together. Kind of like verse 1, verse 2, or the main verse and the chorus, something like that. And I'm kind of waiting for those parts to emerge. I'm just practicing guitar, I'm doing this, that, and the other, or just show up. This stuff just shows up, right? Oh, I got it right here. It shows up in your head, or it shows up while you're playing. And once you get one or two parts that are coherent and you look at them and you're like, yeah, those don't sound like my other songs. That sounds new. That could be a good new song. And once you realize that, then you do not sit around and try to overanalyze the whole creation of the song and everything from that point on. You just get the two parts, you put them together, you go back and forth. And let's say the old school way of going with your bandmates, you go down to band practice, you show them to the bass player, you show it to the drummer, the singer, whoever it is. They bounce their ideas off of you, whatever, and you start practicing and nailing it down. And you just start playing the song. And then you record it on your little recorder, you take it home, you listen, and then you come back and I was thinking, and the bass player says, yeah, over the last week I was thinking too, maybe we should change this. And okay, and you play the song. You play the song, you work on the song. You play the song, you work on the song, and you just start hammering it out, and you go through all those nights of thinking, oh God, this song, I've been listening to it. Now we have the whole thing down. And I realized it sounds just like, that David Bowie song from the 1977. Crap, I don't even know if we can release this thing now. It sounds just like that. We're going to have to change something. And you got, okay, back to the drawing board. And this is the process of working out the song. And so once you have figured out just the fundamental kind of, points here, then you just put it into action and you get going. And then it works itself out as you go. It's like in the hero's journey, you have the refusal of the call. Something calls the hero to go into the underworld or into the unknown and face all their fears, and they don't know what's going to come. But then at first they're like, oh, I don't know if I'm prepared. I don't know if I'm trained enough. I'm not ready for that. And they refuse the call. And then when they finally accept the call and they cross the threshold, Then they move into the unknown, and whatever they have and whatever they take with them is all they have. And then in the hero's journey, what Campbell says is that you get helpers. Eventually, you may meet a mentor, but you always get helpers right then and there, and they kind of point you in the right direction, and synchronicities occur, and the whole thing becomes an active alchemical process with the environment, and it starts to unfold, and you have all the trials and tribulations. You have the ups and the downs and the feelings of creativity and the feelings of self-deprecation and all this stuff, and the whole thing just unfolds. And so if you sit around at the edge of the cave, and be like, oh, I'm going to get all my tools and I'm going to this, you're not going to ever get going on it. So you have to figure out, okay, the one or two things I know about what it is that I'm doing. It's the same thing applies to a writer writing a book. The one or two things that I absolutely know about this endeavor are this, and those never change. So I'm going to put those two things together in some kind of a format, and I'm going to either go to the print shop and I'm going to print these little cards, and they're going to say these two things on them, and then I hand it out. Or I'm going to go make a comic book out of it, or I'm going to make a song out of it, or I'm going to make a podcast or a little mini short film out of it, or I'm going to book something down at the bookstore an hour I'm going to talk at an open mic, or whatever it is. I'm going to take these little pieces and I'm going to put them out there. And then I'm going to see what happens, and I'm going to respond to the feedback, and I'm going to let the process, the journey, the artistic process unfold. And that's where you are, Steph. You got to just take what you have and not try to overthink all the way out anymore, because you've done enough of this 30,000-foot view stuff, and you have enough right now, and now you just have to take what you have and just get your feet wet, get your hands wet, and just go in there and do it in a way that's courageous, that punches through, that just says, well, I don't care. I might lose my whole career over this. Boom, I'm going to punch through. I'm going to put it out there.
I'm ready for that. Yeah. This was very, very helpful, because I think what you just helped me to realize was that the artist, that's one thing that I never perceived myself to be.
You have to perceive yourself as an artist.
I always did dance and yoga and all of this stuff, but because I couldn't sing or create art or make music, I didn't consider myself an artist.
Ah, right.
Yeah. So this is something that I realize is that, like you said, I'm used to doing things and then performing or supplying a tool to somebody to help them. They would come to me and expect something. So this is where my mindset has to shift. It's not like, even if I go, to this, we're teaching at a college on Monday, and it's like, what are you going to do for me? That's the attitude. What are you going to create for me that I can look at that's beautiful? What are you going to do for me? What are you going to do to help me? And that's the attitude that I'm having to rewire, because I realize now that I want to be that bold person, and what are you going to do for me? I don't know. Let's see. What can we do together? That's how I want to show up. I don't want to show up saying, this is my product. Do you think this is valuable for med students? I don't want to do that. I want to be honest and say, this is a co-creation actually. And let's embrace the unfoldment instead of having a manual in front of you of this is what I'm going to produce for you.
Instead of a product, let's say this is a process.
Yes.
And I'm going to introduce you to a process.
Right.
Yes.
And here are just three parts of the process that kind of encompass the whole thing. Step 1, step 2, step 3. This is the 3-step process.
Yeah,
and
great.
You will find all these little micro steps in between, and you might expand it out to a 10-step process for yourself. But I'm going to introduce you, just like how a painter would teach other people how to paint, and they would say, this is a process, and first we start with this, and then we get to here, and then we get here. And by the time, and then you as an artist are going to figure it out on your own. I'm just going to show you that this is the basic kind of process that is going to be unfolding here. And yes, the thing about being an artist, and this is another problem, is that if your endeavor is of the religious or spiritual nature, then it is not aligned with making stuff.
Right.
It's just not that kind of a world. It's not about making stuff.
Right.
It's about states of consciousness, states of being. There's nothing external to make.
But it's also bringing wholeness
Yes.
and health
Right.
to the community.
It's about right
Right.
to yourself and therefore the community. So, but
Right.
it's process of refinement, and in the alchemical system, they have this idea of the philosopher's stone, and it's sort of an enigma. People don't know: is it a thing that we're searching for? Is it a thing that we're making? Is it a thing in itself, or is it an elixir that helps you make other stuff? And so it's because it's kind of all those things. And so, but in the same way that art is, yes, there's the final art, but that is just the material kind of end result. If you said, if an artist said, okay, you gave an artist a choice and said, all right, so you can keep doing what you're doing, creating these paintings or these movies or whatever, or you could press this button, and every time you press this button, the newest, best stuff would just come out, right? And you wouldn't have to do all this kind of stuff, but you would just, the thing, the art would be produced, and it would come out of you, and it would be yours. This would be your new painting, your new album. What would you like to do? And it might be novel or whatever to say, oh, press the button or whatever. But what would happen is the entire meaning of life for that person would be obliterated. And so they would never choose that in the end.
To me, it feels like AI.
Yeah.
And what AI is doing with the ability to cultivate art, to whatever, and it's just, you just put in words, and it's, the whole process is gone.
Yeah. The whole, so
But
that,
to me,
that's
it almost
more
feels like,
flatland.
to me, it almost feels like, in a way, there's an attempt to salvage the process, to salvage and appreciate the process.
To salvage it?
Yeah, because I think as we proceed with tech, that we are losing process.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. The technology, and artists talk about this all the time, about how they like the technology. It helps them create things in, fast and in ways that were even impossible before. But they'll also tell you that the limitations, their technological limitations that existed before, let's say recording music, those limitations forced us to be creative and forced us through the creative process, and we came alive through that.
Yeah, it's like that balance. You guys were talking about earlier. I saw somebody on I forget what it was, an article that was written that was talking about well, it actually said self-analysis versus no self. And I was like, yeah, I think this is like this whole thing that everybody's trying to solve is like, it's actually both. Like, you want to try to live in both kind of at the same time. Like, there's this connection, but I also have to be very here and very present. There's always like, to me, it feels like releasing the binary. And like you said, just making sure maybe that the tech doesn't take off too fast exponentially, which it kind of already has, without salvaging the process and what that can, or like the pleasure and pain. It's kind of like they're both kind of needed a little.
I think it's an organic process that's going on, and I think it will balance itself eventually.
Great.
It will in a semi-destructive way. There was a guy came to mind. I can't remember who he was. There was a guy that kind of came from like the Burning Man community or something like that, and he was an artist. I think he's a painter, and very high-level master painter or whatever. And he, through connections or whatever, got himself a gig teaching corporate boards how to think like an artist, how to engage like an artist, the whole mindset of the artist. And he did not go in there trying to fit with the board's mindset. He came in there with something completely out of the box and said, you guys learn what I'm doing. I'm not going to try to interface with you. I'm just going to show you how we do this and how we think.
That's right.
Right?
That's it. Because you know
yeah.
what's so interesting is lately I've been really experiencing, fortunately, these moments of, real, we all have them, those moments of bliss, enlightenment, these kind of feelings of like, oh, I'm really tapped in, like this is great, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I've been really feeling that and really noticing that. Now I live by myself, so it's easy to cultivate that environment, right? So, but really realizing like this is my little heaven. And like, I don't have to keep leaving my little heaven to like go into other people's hell. So like, this is what I'm realizing, like, come to my heaven.
Two types of artists. My brother told me about this. I didn't even know this. There's two types of artists in this understanding. One is the kind of artist that uses their skills to help make other people's lives, businesses, whatever, more beautiful, right? And then there's the artiste, there's the person who says, I have created my own personal world. Now come in and see what I have created.
Yeah, that's what I want to have the confidence to do.
Well, so if some people, I am not the first kind. I am not the kind of person who makes art for other people as a provider. Actually, I am an audio engineer, and I actually do provide a service to people doing mixing and mastering where I'm there to give them a product.
But it's not your whole life.
But that's not my whole thing.
But maybe it is a little bit of both, though. Maybe.
And it's a little bit of both, and I'm putting my own creation in there for sure. And I say that I am doing that to an extent. I guess I am that kind of an artist to an extent, but my main gig is my own bands, my own books, my own stuff, my own ideas. And I'm in most of my services in that. And so by this whole thing of me getting on Zoom with you and putting it on YouTube and saying, hey, here's this thing that we're working out. This is the same thing as what I was saying about that artist that went in with the board of directors and said, hey, here's how I do things and think about the world. And he's not actually doing it for them. He's introducing them to a way of thinking.
Yeah.
And that's the service. And so that's what we're doing here. And then the last point on this is that if you, everybody has artistic skills, but not everybody falls into, their role doesn't fall into the archetypal form of the artist. But the artist is directly related. It's on the same line it's on the shaman line.
Yeah.
Okay?
Or like the alchemist line, right?
The alchemist line.
Yeah.
The alchemist is on the shaman line. The mystic is on the shaman line. You could say the preacher, or the let's say the monk. The monk is on the shaman line. So if you're on this spiritual line, you're on the same line where the artist is. And so it's not too much of a break to start to get in line with the mindset of the artist, because this whole thing that we're talking about here lives through the mindset of the artist. And so I would say that, and our stuff, we naturally attract artist people because it's artist think, and all this stuff is artist stuff.
Yeah.
And so you have to be an artist. You have to be an artist. And you can be a very technical, Leonardo da Vinci was an artist, but he's also a magician, a scientist, an alchemist, someone who's very heady and airy and thinking about ideas and stuff, but he's an artist. And so you just now have to start thinking about things in terms of being an artist, creating art, about process, and about the unfolding of things over time, and instead of thinking about things, start thinking about development, start thinking about process, start thinking about journeys, thinking about questing, start thinking about action and movement and evolution. This is all more feminine. The things is all masculine stuff. That's all products of modernity and rationality. We have to create this method. I have to create this product. I have to create this protocol. I have to create this business.
And I think that's how women,
right.
yeah, I think women who aren't identified as an artist have had to think
Yeah, to interface
that I'm
with that
creative,
world.
but to interface with that world, I have to produce you a product.
But that whole deal, that flatland world of things without depth. Yeah, come into my office. I got a thing for you. It's this pill,
Yeah.
and then leave, and then whatever. The next person, they need a thing, another thing. Oh, I just got to write off, more things, and we're now in a point where we have this whole AI thing. It's just more of that, and so that's all crashing. And it's crashing. It doesn't crash like the way we think of Armageddon from some movie where there's the archetype of Armageddon is being inspired in the collective consciousness. People are talking about nuclear war and all that kind of stuff shows up. But really, it crashes through 1,000 different little degradations.
Yeah.
1,000 little suicides and degradations and failed businesses and politicians trying to push something and it didn't work. And it's just... And failures of infrastructure, and it's just 1,000
Like a huge collective mirror shattering.
just a huge collective mirror just shattering in all these places and stuff, and the whole picture is still there, but it's all shattered. And then the way it comes back together is it just doesn't come back together in a new way under the same paradigm. It comes back together in a new way with a whole other look at life, kind of like after a dark night of the soul, and you were really career oriented and you had everything lined up for you and you're making $300,000 a year and you're jet setting around the world and all of this, but in the background you were addicted to something, or in the background whatever it is, and then you had this terrible crash, and then that whole world rejected you and all this, and now you had to reinvent yourself, and then you find yourself 20 years later in a completely different way of life altogether, and you don't even have the values of a career anymore. Now you're an artist living on the beach in Croatia, painting or something like that, and or living in Bali or whatever and fishing for your own food every day. That's a totally other way of living, and that's what is going to also in a trillion ways manifest. And so we have to kind of let go a little bit of what's happening to the world.
Yeah.
And we have to look at what's happening to us and our own little piece of the world. And we don't have to transform the world. We just have to transform ourselves. And then to the degree that we help the world, there is a give back part. There is a give back part, and we will each figure out what the give back part is. But it's less important than the commitment to the life art.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, thank you guys. That's
yeah.
very, very helpful, is to just keep, even though I feel like I'm going into the belly of the beast and we are getting jobs, so I kind of feel like that, but it's just kind of a leveling up for me the artist thing was very helpful. A leveling up of me to not get too attached to my environment when I'm there, and to just not to see through it, and just to keep really committing to who I am.
Just, be authentic. Just keep that in your mind. Just let yourself be you.
Figure out what little piece of gold that you have that they need from you, and just give them that. Just a little tiny, and the thing is that what you just like the artist, what you are going to put into the world is going to show up through what they call the creative process, which is a semi-destructive and painful process. And so you just have to keep going into your own pain.
I'm good. I'm pretty good at that.
You just keep going into your own pain. Keep going to your own discomfort. Keep going into your own triggers.
I mean, at some point, there's not even an option to deny it.
No, there's no
It feels more comfortable. It feels actually more uncomfortable to not go into it immediately.
Yeah, there you go. That's what you also have to train yourself is
keep going into it. Keep feeling the feelings that show up, because everybody has these cycles, these mood cycles.
Yeah.
And when you're in the down part, just remember the down part. Did I even write it down right here? Is the recycle. When you're at the bottom of a cycle. If it's the torus, it's the bottom of the whole thing. And to recycle is
it's beautiful.
We think throw away something. Let's recycle this. You kind of throw it away, and then you let the cycle start again. So when you're at the down part, you're at the recycle part, and you have to allow the recycle to do its thing. And so you have to basically let the whole substance of death, of a little mini death, take you over and be with it. And out of that little death of discomfort and all the shit that floods in of how much you suck, and all that floods in at the death point, you just accept it all, you let it all come in, you feel it all, and then you don't put anything on it, don't expect something from it, but it will from time to time, a little piece of smoke will come out of it. There will be something will be created right there. And then that is what you put back into the torus, and you use that as the gold. That's the gold, the alchemical gold. That you then put back into your ego, into your psyche, and you go, oh, okay, and then you start using it for creation. And then you fly on it for a while, and then you die down again, you crash again, and you just let it recycle, and you just become familiar with and comfortable with dying a lot.
Yeah, I think one thing that Melissa said that resonated with me in regards to this is, at times of my prior deaths, I would definitely resonate as the over empathetic or borderline, whatever pathology you want to put on it. That would be what I would resonate with. So in my recycle moments, I would get stuck and feel, I would get stuck in observing the grandiose and the narcissist and all of the resources they had in things that like they were doing
Oh.
Do you see what I'm saying? I would get caught by the narcissist. I get caught by the grandiosity, and then I would just keep myself small, keep myself small.
Oh, yes. And now we're learning about borderline and narcissism. And that's what you'll do. And it sounds to me, we're just barely learning about this. It sounds like to me they're two sides of the same coin.
Totally. Do you watch Sam Vaknin?
Yeah, we just started watching him.
I've been watching him for a couple years, and this
okay.
Empath and thing, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is all the same thing.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you got it. And so it's the thing about it is they're both, like he says over and over, they're compensatory mechanisms. They're the way that the psyche formed to deal with a trauma.
Yeah.
The whole thing of, and this is where I haven't looked at him long enough to know, but I heard him say in an interview with Richard Grannon that once you identify somebody as a narcissist or a borderline, well, that's it. Nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, no, that's not it.
That's not it. Yeah. And then also, not everybody is a 100% borderline or 100% narcissist, right?
Yeah, and that's what I want to ask you guys real quick is, this is the one place where I've disagreed with Richard and Sam, is that they pigeonhole them in that label. And there, I believe actually you can understand this to the degree where you can cultivate healing.
Oh, well, if it's true what Sam says, and it is, of course, that these are compensatory mechanisms that grow out of trauma, and now he's saying not just your trauma, but your parents' trauma or whatever, well, then that means that there's something still existing in the psyche, in your neurophysiology, in your hormonal system, in your organs. There's some pattern, there's some discordance, some blocked energy that's still existing, that is still giving rise to this, because otherwise the borderline or the narcissistic cycle would have just kind of died down and fallen away. The fact that it's still orbiting means that there's still something to orbit around. So now your job is to go find what is where is the source of that cycle? What is the blocked energy? What is the trauma that's at the base of this? And that is in the shadow work category. That's in the emotional processing category. That's in the category of self-analysis.
Right.
And going back and looking for techniques and trying, IFS or whatever, shamanistic techniques, if those work for you, or whatever it is, psychedelics, whatever it is, but you're looking for trying to get to that original trauma and allow it to breathe or whatever, and try to reintegrate itself in the
overall system.
In the overall system. You don't just sit there and go, well, I guess I'm a borderline and I'm a basket case.
Right. So would you say that once you start feeling like a victim from your own point of view, or from feeling victimized, that then we're starting to get to a part of the healing process, or a part of healing the trauma, that seems to be going in a correct direction?
Yeah, as long as this is where people can start to become so identified
This is the issue.
with the diagnosis.
Well, that's illness, and this personality,
then that becomes their identity. So what you have to say is, okay, I have those traits, I have this epigenetic trauma, I have to work on it, I'm processing the trauma, but this is not my quote unquote
not me
identity.
Right.
That's so you're in a down cycle and you're like, I'm a victim, and maybe you got into some kind of a fling and you got thrown down, and now I'm a victim, here I am again, I picked up another narcissist who hurt me, and it's kind of a shared responsibility. I did it, I know I did it, but he's the bad guy that did it to me. And to the degree that you identify with either him as the problem, could be a boss, whatever it is, anybody out there, or you identify with the disorder itself as my issue that keeps on going, my borderline, my personality disorder, then what ends up happening is that ends up being a distraction, and it ends up separating. It ends up holding here's the conscious ego, and here's the original wound that it's all emanating from. It kind of holds them off as separate. Whereas if you can just take the state of consciousness that's occurring and just allow your present moment to collapse into the feelings and the state of victimhood itself, without projecting out and saying why, or this is who did it, or I got to be careful next time, or remembering the scenes. Instead of doing that, you just allow yourself to be, you allow the state of victimhood itself as a state to actually just fumigate and to be there.
That's the trigger for
That's
the
emotional processing.
that you're using that as a trigger to clear that emotional energy.
Right.
Right,
Because the
right.
one thing we've never tried as a people, what we have not tried with all these different methods of talk therapy and this and that and all this and taking drugs or whatever it is, the one thing we never tried was just allowing the thing we're trying to avoid, which is a state, it is a negative internal state, to actually line up with our presence right here, just to eat the state, just eat it, right? That's the
Yeah.
one thing we never did. We never tried, hey, well, why don't we eat the poison? Why don't we try that?
It's the only thing that ever worked for me.
Right,
It's the only thing that ever works.
right.
Eating the poison. It's like, oh, chicken pox is going around. You go into the chicken pox and
Yeah.
get it, right? That's how you heal. So
And this is the antithesis of the modern medical system, really.
it's the antithesis, and so there's not a lot of people that want to go along with it. But as you do it more yourself, master it, and also learn to accept that it's slow, and that
Yeah.
you have two choices. You can either heal and evolve yourself slowly over many years, over a lifetime, or you can just degrade into more of a basket case. Those are your two choices. There's no rapid, I want to get in the Ferrari and go there quick. That's not an option. You have two choices. Devolve into a basket case, who then has to be put into a nursing home and abandoned, or slowly use your life to master your inner state slowly over time, and have your highest purpose manifest in this lifetime, and then pass away in a clean way. Those are your two choices.
It's true.
And there's no other choice. There's no other.
Yeah.
So let me get there faster, quicker, 1, 2, 3, whatever. That's not really available.
Yeah, I think the crash and burn method, I didn't end up in the nursing home, but I definitely did the
You're not
ambush.
at that age yet, but
Right,
yeah.
right. But I definitely had ambush experiences, and I've realized that it had a lot to do with not trusting the unfoldment and having this sense of urgency and control over the process.
Yes.
So
and
I
and
lost.
I understand it.
Yeah.
I understand that, constantly trying to get in there with your creative problem solving mind and control everything. And I go through bad TMS, it's the John Sarno acronym for psychosomatic symptoms. Back pain, muscle pain. I just get attacked in a muscle in my back. I'm like, oh, and I just have to live with it for a week or whatever. When I'm in a stage of having to be creative in the world, having to put myself or my art in the world, and then not knowing how it's going to work out, and have the constant anxiety of wondering if this is going to get screwed up, or if this is going to work out, or that's going to work out, and trying to monkey all over it and trying to control all over it, and I can't control it. And then I create this fear, this state of a need to control the situation that can't be fully controlled. It can be to a degree, but not fully. And then hovering over that state with anxiety. And that itself creates a field which makes the world give me more of, actually makes the bad stuff happen.
Yeah.
'Cause I
I
can't let
experienced
go.
that. Yeah.
And-
Yeah. I
and
get
so-
very physical reactions when I'm too much trying to problem solve.
and when you're,
Like using the body, like this was what I realized, is this objective and subjective union feels to me like balancing the dynamics between the mental or mind intellect
Yes.
and the somatic intellect,
yes,
like the field and the mind together.
yes.
Like finding that balance. And that's, obviously I get imbalanced, and those things, the opposite shows me where I need to go. But it's
And
process.
probably the problem solving mind, the overactive problem solving mind, probably turned on again as a compensatory mechanism, so that the individual you would never have to be in danger like that again.
Totally. It goes back to mom, family.
Yeah, you could figure your way out. In fact, that's why we evolved this part of the mind, is to figure our way out of ice ages and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so and I'm using it also. I'm overusing it to be able to mitigate the sense of being in danger in the world, growing up in New York City and stuff, and all the dangers. And then my mom reiterating, going, oh, be careful out there and all this kind of stuff. So just putting this whole fear in the environment, and then going out there in the crazy world and stuff actually happening, almost getting hit by a truck or a bus, or getting mugged by people down the street and stuff like that, in actual danger. And so, and then I developed this overactive mind to be able to, I'm very good now with being able to go into a city situation and be able to intuit my way and be safe, because I've developed that.
It's almost like the upside of that could be, and what has felt to me to be a way to navigate the field.
It is.
Like, I feel like, okay, I've done this many times. Like, I can do this, and I can always find a way to feel safe. And just the last 2 weeks or so that I've been in this new place, for some reason,
you're in a new place.
Yeah, I'm in a new place, like over the last 3 weeks or so. And
where you put your desk?
Pardon me. Oh, yeah. Well,
your new place.
I just moved my desk towards the window here. Yeah, this is my new place.
This is your desk, and it's towards the window?
Yeah.
So you're just using window light?
Yes.
So for the podcast, back to that subject.
Yeah.
If you can do podcasts during the day, you can have this window light now. Maybe you can put a little other light on as a supplemental light if you want to. But
I just discovered that. I moved the desk here.
Looks great.
But it does get sun at times, so that's why I have to move it. But and I so appreciate you for your help.
Oh yeah,
but
no problem.
that the whole being in here recently, something has drastically shifted for me, Colin, and you just said it. And I said to my work partner, I said, for the first time in my life, I didn't realize how I was always trying to find that way out in all circumstances, even if I liked where I was. I was always like, where's my exit plan? How do I navigate? How do I, I was always trying to figure out, how do I dodge all this. And since I've, over the last couple of weeks, I don't want to identify it with a location, although I have a lot of external beauty and water all around me, is that I said, for the first time in my life, I know what it feels like to feel safe. And I didn't realize until right now that I had been living my entire life in every circumstance, always feeling unsafe. I didn't identify with I would have never even admitted that until I felt the feeling of, oh my God, environment. And what it was I cultivated an inner sense of safety through my shadow work. Mm-hmm. But somehow within this shift of environment, something clicked in me that I was like, I am safe in my environment. And that was like, I didn't realize until I felt that, how unsafe, how I've lived my entire life in a defense mechanism, wondering why I got autoimmune disease and my body was rejecting itself.
That's right. Now that defense mechanism won't die easily. So you switch the environment, and you were able to get a whiff of what it's like without that, because it changed the state, and it will attempt to rise back up again because it's it's an entity.
You know what happened is that happened to me already, where I had a moment I had an interaction with my mom, whom I really tried to love, and maybe this is an issue where I need to let it go. But something came up. It was that immediate recognition, and she had just said something very simple, such as like, oh, I need to come back out to see you again, knowing that I know she loves to kind of feed on my energy. And immediately I could be that higher state watcher, because I'm the observer, but I really was like, oh my God, I see how this energy is what's kept me constantly triggered. And immediately when she said that, I started to feel all achy in my joints. I started to
Right.
feel really tired and really exhausted, like I was repeating my initial phases of my autoimmune disease 20
Yes.
years ago. And I
Right.
was like, oh my God, what's happening?
Yes.
Like, this has
Yes.
been in remission for 20 years. What's happening?
Yes.
And immediately I put it together within my
Yes.
mind. And
Right.
as soon as I put it together in my mind, I actually said to myself, this is not my life. No, 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 no. This is not happening. This is not my life. I see what's happening.
Right. It's
And
a pattern. It's a
I've,
cycle.
yeah, I've
Right.
already done that. I'm
Right.
not doing that again.
Right.
This is not my life now. And
Uh-huh.
honest to God, the next day, all symptoms were gone.
Ah.
And it's just
That's
really
great.
realizing
Oh.
to me how quickly we can shift symptomology if we have a true understanding and willingness to say, no, this is not
So,
it.
Stephanie, this is very important. I want you to write this down in your journal, make a separate page for this, and write down everything that you just said from what you when you met with your mom or talked to your mom, and what happened and what arose and how you watched the cycle, and then how you separated yourself from the cycle and saw it as a
Yes.
separate thing, and you placed the cycle in the context of your childhood and your upbringing, and you saw the relationship between the cycling of this state and the symptom, and that the psychic state and the symptom were one and the same entity, and then you separated off from that and allowed that to have its own space, and that whole thing, that right there, your testimony right there of how it was you accomplished multiple things in that moment. You put yourself into a trigger situation, then you watched what happened, because a mother thing is a trigger situation, then you watched what happened, and then you separated your conscious watcher mind from the cycle, from the anxiety, from the state itself that was arising, and then you connected that in your mind, that anxiety cycle, to the symptoms in the body, and then you allowed it to be separate from you. And that whole process right there, that is the sort of advanced or semi-advanced level of this work that you do all the time. That right there. We talk about shadow work and all that kind of stuff, and people don't really know what is really going on inside the work and what is it really looking like when you embrace the cycle or you deal with it or whatever. The only thing I would add to that is you now back off from your mom, say goodbye or walk away, and then the cycle's still processing. You go sit on the couch, and then you go embrace the feelings and maybe cry through it, and allow it to really come up and to really flood up and to really kind of leak out. Add that to it. That whole thing and the way you described it and everything is what we're doing, and what this is, that is the work right there. That's the work. Now that you know that, now imagine you have to teach that to other people, and they're not even at the level yet of being mindful enough to even be tracing their cycles and to relate their trigger points, and they have to just start getting into the basic awareness stuff and start tracking down their cycles and when their symptoms show up and how their symptoms are related to triggers and the outside world. So that's the next level. First, you're aware of all these because you spent all this time looking at yourself. And then you're at the point of going into triggers and separating off from the trigger. Now, sometimes the trigger will be so strong that it will yank your consciousness into it, and you'll argue with your mother and you won't be able to stop yourself.
Right.
So
I think that's where a lot of people stop.
But then sometimes as you walk away from that and go, oh, damn, I fell into it again, and you keep on trying, then you get these moments where I had one with my mother the other day where I was arguing with her, and she actually kind of cracked up because she's been in a very difficult place lately, and I recognized that our normal bickering, kind of like Italian kind of bickering thing or whatever, was actually, she was in a more delicate place, and it actually kind of cracked her, and she kind of broke down, started crying and stuff, and went and I woke up in the middle of the cycle, and I just, all the emotions of arguing with her just went down to zero, went from 90 to zero, and I realized, oh crap, what we're doing is fucking dangerous.
Well,
I could hurt
I
her.
was there and I pointed it
Yeah.
out.
Oh crap, this is dangerous. And then I stopped the whole thing, and all the endorphins and everything just fell down, because I realized this cycle is something between us. It's autonomous from us, and I backed my consciousness off of it, and it just collapsed. And that's what we're doing here. That's where the kind of
something's
separation.
been happening to me.
Yeah, that's it. Go ahead.
Something that happens to me visually, visually when this happens is when I get into a pattern, a repeated cycle, a repeated loop, when it's overdone its stay. It's time to be stopped or looked at different or gone into differently.
Yeah.
What I actually see is a record. Like I see a record going real slow, like the record going around and around and around and around and around. And at that moment, I'm like, oh shit, we've been here before too many times. No, this has to stop here.
Yes. This is the most important stuff that we can talk about. This kind of stuff, talking about our own personal lives and how we are either falling down or evolving through these difficult, through these cycles. They're all cycles, through these pathological cycles that are either happening in relationship or that are just autonomous within ourselves and our own moods. And how we embrace them, how we deal with them, how we process them, how we separate from them, how we categorize them, how do we understand them, and just analyzing our cycles, our pathological cycles, and discussing it with each other and going, oh yeah, I do the same thing and here's how it works. This is the most important work, because all the other stuff is just theory stuff. And this is where we're talking about the subjective states of how this stuff actually happens in life, and how we're evolving through analyzing our own cycles and separating.
Thank you guys.
From them.
Yeah, I appreciate you today. Thank you very much. I don't want to take up any more time. So
we'll go for now. But I want to ask you something really quick. When we've been, since we've been doing these Zoom calls, we've been just posting to YouTube the whole thing, including you guys.
Oh, okay. I didn't look.
Right. So I need to and a lot of times everybody kind of disguises their own process just enough to where, we talk personal on all these always, but but do you want me to cut all this stuff off or keep it on?
I don't. I'm very open, fine with everything staying on. If you want to cut it off.
Oh, no.
I'm totally fine. I'm fine with being on, yeah.
Okay, great. I think it's better because people who are serious, people who are going to make it, this is almost 3 hours, and people who are going to make it into this is the third hour is what we're doing here. There's going to be serious people that would like to hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah. This is the most important stuff that we could do, and so and then in 2 weeks, I think we're gonna do. We haven't scheduled it yet. We may be doing an interview with somebody, and so we may do a shorter, like 1 hour thing, and it'll just be us talking for an hour. We don't have to do any presentation. So we can talk more about this, and if Scott's on here, you can bring this back up or bring more information.
Okay,
and
great.
We'll
I mean, I'm really open and fluid. I'm appreciative to be here. I really honestly do look forward to this because I don't get to have this many these types of conversations. So whatever you can offer or not, or you can, I'm totally open for anything. So thank you.
Well, we thank you because
it's great. We love hearing what you're doing.
Thanks.
And good luck on Monday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. And again, if it doesn't work out, like part of me has been very curious as to whether trying to push this into the medical field is part of what I need to let go. So I don't know, but I'm on the journey and I'll find out.
It's great.
So you kind of have some notes of what you're going to bring?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay,
it's pretty surface level, as you said, but I feel comfortable with being in that place, and I'll let you know how it goes, and I'll even share with you. I just have like 5 slides. I'll even share with you guys like what I wrote up.
Great. Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
I'd like to look at that. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's
I'll send that to you.
very good that you're going to have that opportunity to put that out there and then judge the feedback. And
It'll be interesting. There's going to be 40. They're med students, and there's a newer breed of medical students that are also engineers who've been told to get dual degrees. So they're actually, it's the engineering medical students.
Oh yeah.
So it'll be kind
my.
of interesting, and I'd like to share with you guys the 5 slides that I have to see
we'd
where I'm
love to.
starting.
You could feel free to share it with us before Monday if you want to. If you want some
Great,
feedback.
I will.
Yeah.
I'll share. You know what? Do you guys have your email on your website?
Yeah. shadowtechalchemy@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. We'll
Okay,
send and
thanks
we'll
for
look
your
at
time.
it. No
Oh
problem.
yeah.
Okay.
We'll
So-
see you soon.
We'll see you. We'll see you soon, Stephanie.
Bye bye.
Okay, bye.